I grew up in the coal region of Pennsylvania, and close to me. Have you ever watched the TV show The Office?
Yeah.
That takes place in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And Scranton was about a good solid 45, 50 minutes northeast of where I grew up. It was the Poconos.
Right.
And if you're from the East Coast, you know what the Poconos are. There's a lot of...
I had friends who were Army brats growing up in Leavenworth, Kansas, who were stationed all over the place, and they would talk about the Poconos. So I knew the name the Poconos.
Yeah.
Even back in Kansas. But
so there you go.
There you go.
So it's a small
world famous.
World famous. But probably what wasn't world famous was there's this TV children's show called Hatchie Malachi. It was, it was kind of like Romper Room or whatever. And they had this guy. His name was Uncle Ted. Right? And he was this older gentleman. He kind of had gray hair, but he kind of like a gray mustache. And he wore a fez. And he had a late night horror movie show where they'd play a horror movie, usually like a B movie or just something old, something that was like in black and white, and he would be the host, right? And he had the set was made to look like he was in some kind of like laboratory that was like in a dungeon or something like that. Uncle Ted, and I remember like being a kid, like being scared and fascinated with this guy, and after talking to you, I thought that this was like a unique thing that was like, this is only happening in the Poconos. And then you were saying that this horror film host thing is way bigger than I could have ever imagined.
So much bigger. Yeah, so much bigger. And it kind of follows the history of TV. We're talking early 50s is where this kind of begins. Every city, every market in this country, from sea to shining sea, had their own TV station. Everything was hyper local. You got your national news, and at night you had your ABC, CBS, and NBC would get your network programming beamed in after the evening news. But after the 10 o'clock news time on your local station, then it was a free-for-all. First of all, in Kansas City, we had Crematia Mortem, the ghostess with the mostess. Also, she was popular enough that she was also on Des Moines and Omaha and, like 4 states clustered around there. Yeah. She was in all those markets, syndicated from these other
So was she doing stations. The same thing that my Uncle Ted was doing? Essentially hosting horror movies.
Hosting horror movies, and the thing about the horror hosts is that they would, depending on what their shtick was, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but depending on what their shtick was, they would superimpose themselves into the movie for comedic timing or for comedic bits, or reproduce some of the props from the movie for little bits between commercials and whatnot. We're talking show business at the base level because 99% of these shows had zero budget. Where does this begin? In the early 50s, we have a gal named Mala Nurmi. Beautiful woman. Very striking features, which helps later. But anyway, so she's living her showbiz life. Gets married, and in 1953, I believe it was, goes to a costume party in Hollywood. Dressed as Morticia Addams from the Charles Addams comic strip in the New Yorker magazine.
Really?
And producer sees her there at this party, dressed this way, and he contacts her about potentially being a movie host on their local TV show. So in 1954... she starts the Vampira show.
It's creepy. I've seen footage.
It's hilarious, too, though. Mala Nurmi was
dark,
hilarious.
Oh, my God, yeah. Was Vampira local to L.A.?
Yes, she was at the time.
So,
and she would.
so if you as soon as you left that area, you would know. Like if you're living in San Francisco, there's a good chance you might not know.
Unless you were syndicated to other stations, kind of like Cremation Mortem was, you were hyper local. So.
And she was a hit, though, right?
She was a hit. And
the reason why
she would drive around. Hold on. She would drive around town in this limousine, all dressed up with their little. I mean, putting on the show.
Oh my God.
And so everybody in her network area knew who Vampira was, and she'd go sign autographs and all this kind of stuff, and always have a funny quip to say. But she had Hollywood friends, and one of whom was James Dean. And
the James Dean.
The James Dean.
Okay.
Because I think her husband was a producer at the time, and they ran in those circles, work circles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was James Dean's death that kind of, what happened was there was some tabloid rag called Whisper Magazine who alluded loosely to the fact that possibly Vampira was James Dean's Black Madonna. So people start running with this in their own minds and their own homes, and they are writing letters to the station talking about, just crazy stuff, because all these people were thinking that Vampira had used black magic to kill James Dean.
They honestly felt that way.
It got to be enough of a problem that the station canceled the show. They fired Mala. It was getting too much salacious publicity. The station didn't want that. So Vampira's show only lasted from the spring of 54 to the fall of 55. That was its entire run. That was its entire run. But made such an impact.
Okay.
That, forever remembered. Now, Mala went on to, play Vampire in a couple of films, and Plan 9 from Outer Space happened after this,
Yeah, but it ain't like, let's be honest, it ain't like Plan 9 took over the world or anything like that.
But
it probably might have tarnished her career more.
Well, at the time it might have, but it rose to such cult status when it started coming out again in the 80s or whenever it started being released, that she kind of before she passed away in 2008, she sort of had quite a resurgence in interest in her career.
There's a great documentary I saw of her.
Yeah,
that's really good, really interesting. It's kind of a shame that that's kind of how things went. Well, the thing I was going to ask you is sort of like, let's be honest. The 50s was very, a lot of the moral majority kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, like, how
communists, moral majority,
and like, let's be honest, like Vampire was hot, and she had a thin waist, like she wore some kind of corset that like she was real low cut dress and all this other stuff. And I was just wondering how the general public took her, because she was so sexual, especially for the 50s.
I think the general public was amused at the character.
Yeah.
Because, most sane people realized she was playing a scary character. Kids loved her. There's pictures of her signing autographs to little kids and that sort of stuff. And, it was all in good fun. And then something happened in 1957 that really, if Mala Nurmi lit the fuse with Vampira, this blew up the bomb. And that was Universal Pictures created what's known as the Shock Package. They had a bunch of movies pre-1948 from the start, and we all know Universal was the monster movie house of the day. They offered a package where any of these stations could sign up for this service and get like 600 pre 1943 or 48, I forget what it was, movies to come, and they could show them on their TV stations. Remember Netflix, when you would order a DVD and it would come in the mail, and then you dropped it back in the mail and sent it back to Netflix back those days? Kind of like that. So you signed up for this package and you would get all these movies. Now, some of them...
That would make sense. So they would have to send the movie...
Right.
The actual movie to the TV station.
And then the TV station would run it and broadcast it.
So they need...
And then...
They send it back. So they need someone to host these movies.
Right. That's what happened. So after that idea got planted, all these station directors started going, hey, here's a fun thing that they did back in L.A.
Yeah.
And so all these stations start having horror movie nights. And then eventually they start having horror movie hosts. So what spawned this whole idea originally was Ray was here pre-Halloween, and Dinner with Drac by Shackerly was playing, because we play Halloween music starting in September.
Yeah.
And you got to talking about how you liked the song.
Yeah,
and I got to saying that the guy was a horror host.
Yeah, that song was on it was a compilation album of like the name of the album was called Looney Tunes.
Yep.
And it was just all these, I guess they call them novelty songs.
Yeah.
Transfusion, 8 Call, and there was Dinner with Drac.
Yep.
I Love Onions is on there.
Shaving Cream was probably
Shaving Cream. Like there's like 50 songs on this thing. And Dinner with Drac was on this, and it's like this guy has it's almost funny because it's like he's singing. He's almost
he's telling a story.
He's almost like Lou reading it, you know. It's like dinner was served for 3 by the sea. You know, I choked on my wine when I found out the main course was me. Ha ha! And I'm like, oh, that always stuck. Well, the guy has a voice that's very unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, oh, and you're like, oh, what's the guy's name?
Zachary.
And I'm like, and you're like, yeah, he was like
Okay, well. John Zachary, without the Y at this point, that's his name. He got pegged to be a horror host, I believe, in Pittsburgh.
Really? Cool.
The Cool Ghoul. And 1957, he was in Pittsburgh. And then in 58, I believe, his show moved to New York. And when he was in Pittsburgh, his character name was Roland. You know, Roland, but he would pronounce it Roland. And he always had My Dear. My Dear was a character in his show. It was typically, you know, somebody taped up in a box making muffled sounds or something, which was supposed to be Zachary's wife or Roland's wife, depending on which market you were in. Now, the song we were talking about came out in 1958.
Okay.
It spent 13 weeks on the Billboard Top 10 charts. The highest chart position was number 6 in 1958.
Was that popular?
It was that popular. These character hosts were crazy popular.
What's the allure? Like, why? What is it?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's
because let's put things on Front Street. There's a little cheesiness going on.
There is
real.
It depended on who you were, though. I mean, so these
and just like you were saying that you could tell that they were going on barely any budget.
Some of these people had 2 or 3 local shows on the same TV station. They would dress up as Captain Neptune for the cartoon show in the morning, and be somebody else in the afternoon. Put on a cape and vampire fangs and be the horror host on Friday or Saturday night. There was a guy in Dallas who went by Gorgon who played his show like super straight. There was Morgus the Magnificent who started off in New Orleans and then went to Detroit and then came back to New Orleans. Excuse me. And he was so crazy popular that not only did he get a song written about him by some local band that stayed on the charts in the local charts around New Orleans. But in 1961, they put him in a movie called Morgus the Magnificent, where he plays a mad scientist trying to help these college kids. Because that's the thing is, a lot of college kids really latched on to these folks. Because, a Saturday night they're sitting around drinking, which the same in 1950s as it was in the 1990s, the same as tonight. And they latch onto these characters, so they were hugely popular a lot of time with the college crowd. The characters span the gambit from, obviously vampires and ghouls and mad scientists. That was a big one.
So let's talk about probably the most famous out of all the horror hosts, Elvira.
Yes, Elvira in the 80s. Somebody was looking into bringing Mala back as Vampira on TV.
In the 80s?
Yeah. And she was either going to be on TV or going to help produce and be show creator. And Elvira, there was some sort of lawsuit or something where, I guess Malo thought that she was stealing her shtick, or I don't remember what it was, but there was a little bit of controversy.
Well, ironically, now that you put it down, but she was stealing Morticia Adams' shtick.
Well,
just saying.
Obviously, Elvira went on to do her movie in Macabre for all through the 80s and into the early 90s.
Yeah, I was going to say a long time. So the difference with Elvira is that she was doing what she was doing, but now we have cable. So now she is...
Right, and depends on, getting syndicated. And also in the 90s, we had Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yep.
That's the same deal, only instead of breaks between commercials, which they had those, you got the comedy throughout the whole show as they ragged on the crazy movies. But I would never have thought to think of them as horror hosts, but they, they fit the total bill.
No, when you talk about Mystery Science Theater, it's sort of like they're using the same movies.
Yeah. Something that started also punching holes in the horror host life was Saturday Night Live. When it started in 74, they put it right in that time slot, after the nightly news, which was when a lot of these shows started.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
So if you are on a competing network, then everybody's going to go watch Bill Murray and...
Makes sense.
Dan Aykroyd. If you were on a competing network, if you were on the same network, then they pushed you back 2 hours. So now half of your audience is no longer awake. And then cable starts going around 81 and starts chipping away.
Going into like the late 80s or 90s, there was USA.
Yeah.
The USA Network.
USA Network.
Up all night.
Yep.
And I remember, I think Gilbert Gottfried was like the host.
Right.
Of the host of whatever movies that they were playing.
Yep.
Definitely not a horror guy. But
no.
And then you realize it's sort of like, okay, and I think it wasn't even at that point. It wasn't even okay. These are just horror movies. These are just B movies.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're good or not didn't even matter.
Right.
And I guess it just all kind of dissolves. So you may be asking yourself, how can I join the Tiki Goth Club? Well, there is no membership. There are no fees. But I have shirts for sale. They're $20 a piece, $5 shipping and handling. If you're interested, go to my website, tikiwithray.com. There's a prompt that says buy a shirt. Follow that, and then that's how you can get your own.
I was going to start talking about Count Gord Vidal. He started off in 1971 in Paducah, Kentucky.
Yeah.
For his Night of Terror. And then moved his show to Washington, D.C. It was the Creature Feature at that point. And he went from 73 to 79, and then from 84 to 87. But he, dresses a vampire. He had some of the better studio or sets, But after TV and cable and all that started to happen, he was one of the first ones to go to an all online webpage and an all internet format in 1997. And he's still doing it today. And you can go to his webpage and he's still posting movies. He's got all sorts of content on there. And if you follow his Facebook, he still posts like a minute and a half promotional little video about what he's up to once a week.
Yeah.
And he's still rocking it. Sven Gulli. He's still doing it. His show was...
Rory from the Reef down in Palm Springs is a big fan of Sven Gulli. Because he's always posting stuff on his Facebook. Watching Sven Gulli.
I watched Sven Gulli.
Hey, Roy.
He started in 70... Rick Cos, the guy who plays Sven Gulli now, was technically son of Sven Gulli. There was the actual Sven Gulli started before that. But Rick Cos started doing it in 79. And did it for a while, came in and out of it, but now he's on the MeTV network. I mean, it's like watching Channel 41 growing up. It's playing Andy Griffith and all those old shows. Yeah. Joe Bob Briggs is another one with his drive-in.
Oh, yeah.
That got... I remember that's on the Shudder network now, the horror network.
Okay.
So he's still doing his Joe Bob Briggs thing, but... That's one thing is horror hosting has not gone away. If you look for it, there are all sorts of new horror hosts happening all the time. When we talked about the Shackerly song, that was in October, and then at Christmas time, my daughter bought me this book about horror hosts for Christmas. But today... tonight, there are horror hosts out on the internet gonna put on a show for you. There's Sally the Zombie Cheerleader. There is the Mummy and the Monkey Show, which I've sat down and watched several Mummy and the Monkey shows, and they're great. They do their show on Facebook Live, and then it gets moved over to YouTube. There's the Horror Web YouTube channel, and on the Horror Web YouTube channel, there's Scara, Damsel of the Doomed, who sits in her tub of terror and will give you about a 10-minute synopsis of some old horror movie she's been watching, which, is kind of cheeky and fun, because she's got to get the review out before the bubbles disappear, so... it's this quick little 10-minute diversion, but, the creativity and
it's still
the
going
lack of budget.
Yeah.
But, the creativity around that, it's still going strong. If this is, I can't say this enough, if this is something that brought happiness to your soul, like it did a lot of us, go out and find one of these folks to support and, just give them some likes and content views and join their Patreon or whatever to keep them going, because I don't know,
or even check out this book. And I'll tell you what, I was wondering what I was going to call the name of this episode, but I think I'm just going to name it after the name of this book. It's going to be called Television Horror Movie Host.